to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen. And thank you. Good afternoon.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the government's begged, borrowed or bought more Pfizer jabs to stop stocks running dry, but won't say how many, where from or at what cost. Stubborn Delta case numbers aren't budging. 21 confirmed today, all in Auckland. So when will the super city get out of COVID jail? Northland's at level 2. It's no longer lucked up, but it seems to be locked out of some regions. What exactly stopped the government deporting the extremist who carried out last week's supermarket terror attack? Immigration Minister Min Kris Faafoi joins us live. And Auckland rugby teams are left on the sidelines as national competitions kick off. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
Ahiaki Mārie, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says it's poised to seal a deal for enough Pfizer vaccine to meet the surge in demand for it. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
After a slow start, the COVID vaccination program has ramped up, averaging about 76,000 shots a day over the past week. At that pace, the country would run out of doses before the next major shipments arrive in October. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has today confirmed the government is finalising arrangements with numerous countries to secure additional supplies. She says that will prevent any slowdown. Ms Ardern says negotiations have been taking place over the past 2 weeks, and once the ink is dry, she'll share more details about the countries involved and quantities secured.
The hospitality sector says the new Level 2 rules, halving the number of people allowed in bars and restaurants, are brutal. From tomorrow, a maximum of 50 people will be allowed to be seated to drink and dine. The previous Level 2 limit was 100. Hospitality New Zealand's President Jeremy Smith says most establishments will be losing money under the new restrictions.
Government, please open the purse strings and save the sector, because you only know what you've lost when it's no longer there, and we can't afford to do that. There's too many staff and hard-working business people dependent on their businesses to survive.
Jeremy Smith says the 22,000 hospitality business owners are under enormous stress. Health officials are closer to working out a definitive link between a COVID-19 case in Middlemore Hospital and the latest Delta outbreak. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the patient who tested positive is part of an infected household. He says 8 of the 11 people in the household have tested positive.
And through conversations with all the people in that household, Auckland Regional Public Health is quite confident about where the link is some time ago to the outbreak and how that infection may have got into the household, but they're just confirming that at the moment.
21 new community cases have been reported today, one more than yesterday. All are in Tamaki Makaurau. Dr Bloomfield says 39 people are in hospital, 6 in intensive care. He says the number of cases that can't be linked to a known cluster has dropped from 43 to 24. The Green Party is warning that rushed law in response to the Lynmore terror attack risks stoking the same misguided anger and resentment that drove the man who carried it out. In Parliament today, party leaders expressed their condolences to the victims and families and their thanks to law enforcement agencies and others who helped on the scene. Immigration and counter-terror laws are now being reviewed, and Greens co-leader James Shaw has urged MPs to be cautious.
If we act now in any way that stigmatises our refugee or migrant communities, either as individuals or as a government, it will serve only to fuel the same false grievances that Friday's attacker used to justify picking up a knife off a supermarket shelf and indiscriminately harming people.
Nearly 80 West Auckland homes were significantly damaged by the flooding last week. The Auckland Council has marked 4 buildings as uninhabitable, 74 as moderately damaged and 106 as having minor damage. Mayor Phil Goff urges those unable to return home to contact the council for support or advice. The number of people charged with breaking COVID-19 lockdown laws has risen close to 200. The latest police figures show 197 people are accused of breaches during the Delta outbreak. 212 charges have been laid, mostly for failing to comply with COVID-19 orders under Level 4 restrictions. Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says an additional 500 people have been given formal warnings. And moving into sports news, top seed Novak Djokovic has continued his bid for a calendar year tennis Grand Slam with a comeback win over young American wildcard Jenson Brooksby at the US Open. Djokovic lost the opening set 6-1 before settling in to win the next 3 sets. The world number one gives credit to his 20-year-old opponent.
Whenever I needed a serve, I found the serve. I hit my spots well. But all in all, it was a very, very physical battle, a lot of exhausting rallies.
Djokovic faces Matteo Berrettini in the quarterfinals. All Blacks fullback Jordie Barrett will learn his fate later tonight after his controversial red card in last weekend's test against Australia. Barrett will face a SANZAR Judiciary Committee after his boot hit the face of Wallabies winger Maria Koroyembeti as he leaped to catch a high kick. All Blacks defence coach Scott McLeod feels Barrett's defence is mitigating circumstances. Meanwhile, the 6 teams in the wider Auckland region will remain on sidelines when men and women's NPC and the men's Heartland Championship resume next Friday. However, with the Auckland region in COVID alert level 4 until at least next Tuesday, a return date for the Auckland, Counties Manukau and North Harbour teams is unconfirmed. And that's the news.
Delta Level 2 questions.
This adds huge stress. That's the word that I would say. We're not going to be able to do this and get our freight delivered. Something is going to suffer.
The new rules.
This is the price, really, of us having the country with more freedom.
And your say?
Chris from Christchurch has got in touch to say, why on earth has the CEO of the trucking industry body not been thinking about the need to test one look at drivers in New South Wales, and the dire consequences should have prompted some thinking.
The answers to your questions. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight rāpa Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel. Showers heavy and possibly thundery at times. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain at times today. Fine at first tomorrow, but a few showers from late morning, possibly thundery near the coast. Bay of Plenty, the central high country, also Whanganui to Wellington and Wairarapa. Showers heavy at times with possible thunderstorms in Kapiti, clearing tomorrow evening. Snow above 800 metres for a time tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, periods of rain or showers, heavy and possibly thundery at times, clearing Westland for a time tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, showers mainly about the ranges, turning to rain for a time tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow, but showers about Marlborough and North Canterbury until the evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail, snow to 300 metres tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, showers. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight rāpa Wednesday. It's now 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, e ho tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Bars and restaurants are prepping for level 2, which comes into force tonight. But this is a new level with a big fishhook. The Prime Minister is calling it Delta Level 2. The government was quick to clarify today that masks won't be required in cafes and restaurants, but the new cap on numbers has taken the shine off a return to business for many places. The hospitality sector says the new rules are choking it, and they're begging the government for help. Our reporter Hamish Cardwell and camera operator Samuel Rillstone and Nathan McKinnon have the story.
A gloomy, rainy day in Wellington matches the mood of the hospo sector, as everywhere but Auckland gets geared up to open their doors to customers tomorrow. But not many customers. In fact, at this new look level 2, just 50 will be allowed inside at any one time. Up to 100 can be at outdoor gatherings. Paul Retamanu runs the Cafe Bar and Function Centre at the Whariwaka on Wellington's waterfront. The latest lockdown has him nearly $500,000 out of pocket.
We've got 70, 80 staff, of those 40 are full-time, 50% are Māori, 8% are Pacifica. We pay the living wage, and most of ours are on over the living wage. So, we want to be deemed as good employers. We are good employers. We look after our people. Can we hold on? I'm not sure.
Under level 2 earlier this year, 85% of his conference business postponed their gatherings.
This time round, when we went from level 4 to level 3, we had 80% cancel. So most of it's not coming back, which is quite significant for us. So the conferencing business, I'm really concerned about that because the other parts of that is 50% of our commercial footprint here in Wellington buildings is government departments. So a lot of them are still going to be working from home.
There are other new Delta rules. Staff must mask up at all times, and customers must sign in and can only take their masks off to eat and drink. At the Rogue and Vagabond off Cuba Street in central Wellington, General Manager Lara Denby says staff will patiently explain the new rules to customers when they're seating and serving them.
As you're seating people, you're saying, hey, look, guys, this is the situation. We need you to keep masks on unless you're eating and drinking. If you do stand up to leave your table, you've got to pop it back on. And you just have to hope that people are going to follow that. And if they don't, then you've got to chase them up. But again, you have to just keep reminding people. This is the thing about level 2 in hospitality is that, we are the ones trying to maintain following those rules.
Andy Jakes from the Good Home in the Christchurch suburb of Wigram says the phone was ringing hot for bookings after the alert level announcement yesterday. He's putting a positive spin on the 50-person cap.
We're not going to be anywhere near as busy as what we normally are, so I'm expecting that the service levels that people get when they come to the Good Home is going to be through the roof, because sometimes in hospital you just don't get the chance to go back to a table as often as you'd like.
But Hospitality New Zealand's Jeremy Smith says the new limit is brutal.
It's trying to fight with your hands tied behind your back, because all we're going to do as an industry is go backwards. So yes, it's great we're moving towards level 1, hopefully, but we're in a scenario where we're going to keep on losing money. We've lost a fortune of money being in lockdown.
He says most of the 22,000 hospitality business owners are under enormous stress, and he's begging the government for targeted help.
Government, please open the purse strings and save the sector, because you only know what you've lost when it's no longer there, and we can't afford to do that. There's too many staff and hard-working business people dependent on their businesses to survive.
Lara Denby from the Rogue and Vagabond says there'll be no live music until level 1. But when it comes, it's party time.
As soon as we hit level 1 that first day, no matter what day of the week it is, I'm sure we will be having a gig.
Till then, living room dancing will have to do.
It is 12 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. If you were listening to that piece on radio, you can check out the video, which will be on our Facebook page. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai, e haere ake nei. The Immigration Minister joins us live to talk about what was done to deport the man who carried out last week's terror attacks. Trips to and from Te Tai Tokerau look set to remain highly restricted despite the region's drop in alert levels. Northland will join the rest of the country, apart from Auckland, at alert level 2 at midnight tonight. But police will be checking those heading through Auckland, even if they're not stopping, and they'll only be accepting a handful of reasons for travel. Anei te kai reporter Anita Blake-Person.
Northland is no longer locked up, but it does seem to be a little locked out.
The area is effectively cut off from the rest of the country while Auckland remains at level 4.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today outlining how Tai Tokerau's level 2 will look while Auckland remains in level 4.
You will be able to transit if you need to, but you'll need to travel through without stopping and with proof of where you're going to. There is not unlimited movement though. If you need to travel for work, then you will be able to transit through Auckland. Similarly though, if you need to travel for personal reasons, including to attend a funeral or tangihanga, attend a wedding or a civil union, collect or accompany tupupaku or attend an education entity, you can do all of those things as well. Again, if you can bring some evidence of why, and you just make sure you keep on driving.
So it will be very limited travel for now, with the message to avoid the trip if you can. But the possibility of any border breach is still causing concern.
Our proximity to Auckland is still an issue for us. We're in a different category to the rest of the country, probably us and the Waikato region.
Ruben Taipare of Tai Tokerau Border Control says huge swells are forecast for Ahipara over the coming days, and they're bracing for surfers wanting to access the waves. But he says volunteers will be out monitoring the community and others across the Rohi during level 2 to make sure people are still vigilant.
We're doing such a good job in controlling it and reducing it. Why take the risk? If we were to take about another week or even 2 weeks, if we went to the same time as what Auckland's going through to the mid-September and just maintaining vigilance, I prefer to do that rather than taking a gamble and it does come in and then backwards we to go to level 3, level 4, and if it does happen in our communities up here, how long will it take for us to get it back out again?
But those restrictions do come at a cost, and the Chief Executive of economic development agency Northland Inc., Murray Reid, says the rohi is further away from the rest of the Level 2 action.
Northland is going to be doing it a little bit tougher than the rest of New Zealand. I have to acknowledge, of course, Auckland, who are still in lockdown, are doing it, 2 levels tougher than everyone else. In terms of addressing it fairness, I have to say that institutes like the organisations like MSD and NB are looking at ways to support businesses, to, I guess, compensate for the fact that we are isolated more so than the rest of the country.
But with summer on the horizon and tourism businesses already suffering, some are dreaming up ways to keep the region connected in spite of the Auckland barrier. Kate Malcolm runs Dive Tutukaka and says while Northland would never want to cut Auckland out, there may need to be some creative solutions for getting by without them for a bit.
There could be packages that include a direct flight from Christchurch up to Kirikiri, for example, hire a car that just comes straight through the corridor, of maybe we pay their tolls or we put an extra, $20 worth of fuel in the tank to compensate that, to encourage them to come straight through. Maybe there's something that we can look at putting different products on. But Northland is quite seasonal as well, so maybe we can change our time frame, look at the delivery of the products that we do offer. Anything's on the table, and I think you have to have robust and open conversation around it.
Air New Zealand has been approached about whether direct flights to other parts of the country could be put on. They're waiting to see what exactly the government's Level 2 order around transiting passengers involves. For now, Northland waits with this message for our southern neighbours.
Hashtag hold door Auckland, hold the door. You're keeping all the White Walkers at bay and we value that. You're amazing.
It's a Game of Thrones reference for the uninitiated and a shout out to the City of Sales.
Well, you are all getting in touch already about the hospitality industry with some suggestions and some thoughts. So Pip says, would these hospitality folk prefer to be in the likes of Melbourne and in lockdown for over 170 days? Something is better than nothing, says Pip. Another listener says, why can't restaurants do 2 sittings, 50 at each, 6 p.m. and 8 p.m? Another listener says, kia ora, so little sympathy for poor Wellingtonians going to level 2. Auckland is doing this tough. And Nick has a thought. Don't know how popular this is going to be, Nick, but let's put it out there and see what people think. Nick says, could we allow restaurants and bars to have a surcharge like public holidays to help them survive on lower volumes? Your thoughts? Homai o whakaaro, would love to know your feedback on that one. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 17 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Health authorities have rebuffed calls for all patients to be tested for COVID-19 when entering hospital, saying that's simply not possible. The Midwives Union has demanded the action after a Middlemore Hospital patient shared a ward with 3 others before later testing positive. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, this afternoon told reporters he was very satisfied the clinicians made good decisions based on the information at the time. He says it's not feasible to test everyone who comes onto a hospital site.
Some of whom are, of course, coming in because of trauma-related admissions or coming in for to be assessed for conditions that are completely unrelated to COVID-19. So there is a process. Or to have baby, yes, there are red or green lanes depending on whether there's a suspicion someone could have COVID, and they are dealt with in different ways. In terms of the potential for others to be infected, there was good infection prevention control advice throughout to minimise any potential risk of others being infected, and subsequently there's been a very precautionary approach taken to standing down staff and to testing other patients who may have been exposed.
The patient belongs to a household of 11. 8 in total have contracted the virus, and officials believe they've identified a link to the outbreak.
Auckland Regional Public Health is quite confident about where the link is some time ago to the outbreak and how that infection may have got into the household, but they're just confirming that at the moment.
That's the Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield. New Zealand has dodged fears it would have to slow down its vaccination campaign, with the government close to securing a deal, boosting its supply of Pfizer doses. After a slow start, the immunisation program has ramped up, averaging about 76,000 jabs a day over the past week. At that pace, the country would run out of doses before some major planned shipments arrived in October. But the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has confirmed that will not occur. She says the government has been in complex negotiations with numerous countries over the past fortnight to prevent that outcome.
As a result of these efforts, we are now finalising arrangements that secure additional supply in September. This will enable us to maintain our extraordinary vaccination rates throughout September until our bulk deliveries land in October. We are still waiting for final contracts to be signed, so I cannot confirm specific countries or details on quantities. They are, however, Pfizer doses, and we will share further information as soon as we are able.
Ko taku manuhiri in INA called Dr Ayesha Verrall, the Associate Health Minister, joins us now. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa.
How soon can we get those extra vaccines?
Yeah, look, I think as you've heard the Prime Minister say, we're not able to share fully all of the details, but I think the key message here is we had been worried that we would need to slow down vaccinations, and we now feel confident enough in these arrangements to say we don't need to, and we can continue the really high level of rollout that we've been enjoying while the country's been at alert level 4.
In order to have that confidence, you must be expecting them pretty quick smart, because obviously we have planned shipments in October. September is the problem month, so fair to say you're expecting them very quickly.
Well, I think that's some pretty perceptive logic there, Lisa. We have a short-term issue that we've been working around the clock to try and address, and yes, the timing is relatively tight.
When did we start asking for them?
I think I can't give you a specific date off the top of my head, Lisa, but you'll be aware that this has been an issue that's really been prompted by the very high level of vaccination we were able to achieve at alert level 4, which we weren't achieving prior to this outbreak and being at alert level 4.
So it's directly as a result of Delta. So only recently did we start looking for a backup plan then?
We always had a plan to vaccinate New Zealanders throughout this year, and we had a known period where we knew supply would be tight in September.
Yeah, but this is a backup plan. It's not the original plan, is it?
No, the original, that's right. The original plan was published, and you'll recall that the Auditor General wrote a report saying we might be unlikely to achieve our targets, and yet we've exceeded them considerably, sometimes by over 80%.
Minister, can we talk about Middlemore? Checkpoint understands that 2 more wards have been identified as COVID exposed as a result of this original exposure. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I don't have any other update on the information from Middlemore, but whenever there is a case, there is a thorough contact trace that's done around that, and if indeed there are new areas that's been identified from that, I'm pleased the staff are taking a thorough approach to identify people who might be exposed.
Is there a shared ventilation system between the ward where this person was kept and other wards there?
Look, I am not aware of what the specifics of the ventilation system at Middlemore are, but obviously that would be the sort of thing that I'd expect the infection control people at Middlemore would be taking into account in their response to the event there.
Let's talk about Northland now, level 2. Is it really level 2? Because if you live in Northland and you wanted to spend a weekend in Hamilton, or you want to go to a mate's birthday party in Taupo, can you pass through Auckland or not?
So you can pass through Auckland for work travel and for essential personal travel. So that's things like going to a civil union, or marriage or funeral or tangihanga, accompanying the deceased from one level 2 area through to another, or if you're, say, a student taking up tertiary study in another centre. So essential personal travel, not for a weekend away.
Is that level 2 then?
Well, it's a substantial improvement on the situation where Northlanders aren't able to leave for these reasons and are then unable to, say, make these important personal journeys as they have been in the past.
But the reality is, isn't it, Minister, that Auckland's in level 4, everything south of Auckland's in level 2, and Northland's in their own zone?
Well, no, Northland's in level 2, and there are...
But they can't travel to other level 2 areas, Minister, unless for the very explicit and small group of reasons that you've just stated. So that's not true level 2.
Well, it is a substantial improvement on the situation where they're unable to do those things, and I think people would understand the reason why, because we do have an outbreak in Auckland at the moment.
So to that outbreak in Auckland, we've got a stubborn number of cases hovering around 20 for the last few days, right? And still a number of so-called mystery cases, 24 unlinked today. If those numbers persist, will it prevent a shift down in levels in Auckland?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we think about when we try and take into account the alert levels. Let's run through a few of them. Certainly case numbers, but as case numbers get low, small events make big differences to the numbers. So they do bounce around a bit, but I think we can all agree that this week in Auckland is a lot better than last week in Auckland and the week before in terms of the outbreaks control. A lot of our cases for over a week now, the majority have been linked to other cases, and the mystery cases are decreasing. So they're currently 24. As the Public Health Unit investigates them, as the whole genome sequence becomes available, those do decrease. As we think about alert level changes, we will focus particularly on those recent mystery cases or unlinked cases, because they, pose a greater risk than those who might have been exposed before alert level 4 came into place, for example. So they're important, but there's no one thing that determines alert level movements. The other thing, of course, is, the testing numbers are only what we know about. The case numbers are only the cases we detect, and so really making sure that we're testing everyone with symptoms, plus at other crucial places, is an important part of being able to shift alert levels.
We're nowhere near the numbers that Ashley Bloomfield wants, right? 7,000 a day. So again, could that stop us if we don't reach those test levels continuously?
Yeah, I think we really do need to drive up that testing because that's what gives you the assurance that you've detected the cases that are out there. We have both looked at the community testing sites that we currently have. We're looking at them in light of where we are concerned there might be a risk of transmission. So we're looking sort of at a sort of geographic level about the distribution of those. But we also need to just test more of some of our critical populations, health workers around MIQ and those essential workers crossing the boundary between Auckland and elsewhere, because those are the people moving around in our community at the moment, and in doing so we may well assure ourselves that we've lowered the risk of undetected cases.
You mentioned MIQ, Minister. Is the Crown Plaza open again for returnees?
Look, I can't give you an update on the Crown Plaza right off the top of my head, sorry.
Because I believe Minister Hipkins indicated that the next wave of people who were supposed to be booked in there are in the next couple of days, around the 9th. So what happens to them?
Yeah, look, I'm not able to give you an update on the status of the Crown Plaza. I'm aware we have a site for all our returnees and people requiring quarantine in the community at the moment. There has been an investigation into the Crown Plaza that's been very thorough, and what's more, historically, it has performed very well throughout the time that it has been used, with the one exception that we're concerned about that might have led to this outbreak.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is the Associate Health Minister, Dr. Ayesha Verrall. Homai o whakaro, we'd love your feedback on that. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Is Northland really in level 2 if you can only travel for very explicit reasons? And what hope does Auckland have, do you think, of moving out of level 4 given the persistent numbers there? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. As the rain fell again today, it was no consolation for some West Auckland business owners still cleaning up after last week's devastating floods. Some QMU businesses had no insurance. Others, whose businesses were completely submerged, are still looking to see what can be saved. And all amidst a level 4 lockdown. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe began their visit in a community still cut off.
First, a level 4 lockdown, now cut off for over a week. That's the reality for hundreds at Te Henga Bethells Beach, forced to hunker down in this rugged seaside village in Auckland's west. In an urgent effort to reconnect locals, heavy trucks rumble up and down the only way in and out, transporting tons of rock to an excavator, filling in a 40-metre hole in the road.
Residents here at Bethells Beach remain completely cut off, while roading crews work as quickly as they can to try and repair the road that was washed out in last week's monster flooding. I'm on the Bethells Beach side of those roadworks, where residents on their daily walk come up to a cage fence. They peer through the fence to check on progress, and they wonder, when will we be allowed back through?
But at the same time, some of the locals aren't overly worried about traffic returning to their seaside oasis.
It's kind of good because the beach is really empty and no one really comes to the beach.
Lucky for kids like Summer, there's still one way they can keep the lockdown snack supply stocked up, with a private landowner opening up alternative access for residents equipped to make the trip.
But you have to have a four-wheel drive car because it's kind of over sand dunes and in a forest kind of thing.
One local still stuck at the beach is Waitakere Local Board member Mark Allen. So we putter back inland towards Waitakere Township, checking in over the phone when we hit reception.
Say you run out of, your favourite chocolate or something. What are you having to do at the moment?
So for people who are down at the beach, they're sending out for it and they're getting people bringing in supplies from all over, family, friends. The other community members are going out for them and dropping it off at a community drop-off point we've got down there.
Mr Allen says 2 lanes in and out of the beach should be re-established by Friday.
It's very quiet at the moment. A lot of the surrounding people for whom Bethells Beach is their favourite spot to kind of get energy have stayed away, and we really appreciate it because we've got to get those trucks coming through. We've got 15 trucks coming through a day, bringing rock from around the region, chucking it in there.
Meanwhile, the clean-up continues 20 kilometres inland at Kumeu. Ruby Lee estimates last week's flood has caused $20,000 worth of damage to her beauty business, and she's not insured.
I never thought in New Zealand going to have flooding because I come from Vietnam. We have a lot of flood, but in New Zealand, I've been here about 10 years, but I never, see anything like that.
A week on, the young businesswoman's still hard at work, sifting through waterlogged gear, deciding what's salvageable and what to chuck out. The plan? To hit the ground running when Auckland hits level 2.
It's pretty much it's like my baby, I look after it. It's all my effort in here. And so I've been here 10 years and started the business after I've been here 5 years. That was since I was 20, actually.
Kumeu local Keith Blind owns the business next door to Ruby and a warehouse space nearby. There's a sheet metal company, timber treatment plant and VTNZ in the same block. All of them submerged and all still cleaning up.
So effectively this was like a lake, yeah? So the water was flowing across this apron and was moving across into the treatment area and then out to the streams out the back here with the pine forest out to the Kumeu River.
Now, Mr Blind says questions are being asked.
The council have a responsibility to step up and check and see what's happening within the waterway system, yeah? Through the culverts, through the drainage systems, and making sure that these tributaries are regularly cleaned and looked after, yeah? Because if water can't disperse, it's just going to do what it's doing, yeah, that's for sure. So yeah, there should be questions asked. People should look at what the council are doing on a more regular basis in these sort of situations, yeah.
It's a busy time for Harry Verk and his clean-up crew from iDry Resolutions. A week on, they're still assessing damage to insulation, water blasting and cleaning businesses' ruined workspaces.
We are 24/7 if there is a leak. So if we got a call around night time, around 2 a.m., so we get our team ready. So teams are on standby all the time and our machines are ready.
Auckland Council says around 80 homes were damaged in the floods. Over the past week, they've red-stickered 4 and yellow-stickered another 74. Meanwhile, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff, following a visit to Bethells over the weekend, is pitching the road and slip repairs to cost around $7 million. The floodwaters might have gone, but the public and private cost continues to rise.
And if you were listening to that piece from our two Nicks on radio, you can check out the video on our Facebook page. Now, Auckland Council says workers completed storm preparation last Monday as soon as they got the weather warning. That included checks of hotspots around Kumeu to clear debris from block points. It says no amount of additional clearing would have helped. The amount of rain was far in excess of what the stormwater pipes are designed to accommodate. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei i a checkpoint. The Auckland rugby teams that have been benched as domestic competitions kick off again. The Immigration Minister on why the government hadn't deported the extremist who went on to commit last week's terror attack. And outside of Auckland, real-world classrooms will be full again on Thursday. So how are principals going to handle the whole mask issue? Homai o whakaro, let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. But really keen to hear if you've got a student or you are a student who's going to a college or high school when it starts up again in level 2. What are you going to do about the mask situation? It's not mandatory, but it's recommended. Will you wear one? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Anea Sarah Mina Pitapita Kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government is confident it can plug a temporary supply gap in the Pfizer vaccine amid high demand for vaccinations this month. Over the past week, there has been an average of around 76,000 shots a day. The next major shipment is due in October, and the country could run out of doses at the current rate of demand. But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government is finalising arrangements with several countries to obtain new doses and prevent any vaccination slowdown. 21 new community cases of COVID-19 have been reported today, one more than yesterday. All are in Auckland, and health officials are inching closer to finding a link between a COVID-19 case in Middlemore Hospital and the latest Delta outbreak. The patient who tested positive is part of an infected household where 8 out of the 11 people are COVID positive. Schools in Alert Level 3 areas will not be allowed to hold exams under a Ministry of Education rule change. The ministry says it made the decision because of the higher risk from the Delta variant. Many hospitality businesses are worried they will lose money under the new Level 2 restrictions. From tomorrow, bars and restaurants outside of Auckland can only have up to 50 people seated to drink and dine. The previous Level 2 limit was 100. Hospitality New Zealand says the new rules are brutal. And finally, former Public Party leader Billy Te Kahika and Vinnie Eastwood have appeared in court in relation to an anti-lockdown protest during Level 4 restrictions in Auckland. They were charged under the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act. The men appeared by video link in separate hearings in Auckland. They were granted access to the internet strictly for preparing their defence. Mr Te Kahika was also permitted to use the internet for delivering religious sermons. Those are your headlines. Our next news update is at 6.
Thanks, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Kei kone Nona Peltier, mina kaupapa kai Pākehī. Nona, an economist is suggesting the government may need to help exporters get their goods to the market. Why is that?
Well, it's a bit of a good news, bad news story, I have to say. So export earnings in August were up 25% on the same time last year. So that's pretty good considering it had been lower for many of the months over the past year. But an economist, Benji Patterson, says that growth isn't all what it seems. So, for example, some areas were up: mechanical machinery, meat, and so forth, some other manufactured goods, seafood, and so on. But fruit and dairy exports were really little change from the year earlier. And that's despite a significant growth in the prices. And that's particularly so for dairy exports. So the shipping costs are eroding the profit, basically. And what he says is that some exporters are saying, hey, you know what? With these sorts of costs, that's just not worth it. And he says that adding up all the costs, he's expecting that will cost the shipping costs, about $10 billion to our exporters next year. And so he suggests that the government maybe needs to step in and help out exporters in the way that they have other industries, for example, with the subsidy on air freight, or, just the $1 billion check they wrote to help airlines keep going and that sort of thing. He says that, for example, air freight on an annual basis accounts for less than $10 billion of total export costs, or rather receipts. But when you look at sea freight, that amount is closer to $55 billion across exports over a typical year. So help may be needed to keep our exporters exporting.
And Nona, can we just take a quick look at the markets?
Yes, we can. So let's see where we're at here. Yeah. So our top 50 index, it rose nearly 0.2%. That was a 22-point increase to 13,332. And the New Zealand dollar, it's still quite high. It's 71.2 US cents, 95.9 Australian, and 51.4 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business News. The government says it wasn't possible to deport the man at the centre of last week's terror attack because he was appealing a decision to cancel his refugee status. But the National Party and some legal experts believe he could have been kicked out of the country. Refugee Ahmed Samsudeen was shot dead by police after a violent rampage at a West Auckland supermarket, where he stabbed several people with a knife that he'd got in store. In 2017, the terrorist was stopped from travelling to Syria to become a foreign fighter and was twice convicted of possessing objectionable extremist material. In July this year, he was released from prison under supervision and was being monitored 24/7 by police. Samsudeen, a Sri Lankan national, was initially denied refugee status in 2012, but he successfully appealed that decision. It was later discovered documents he used in his application were fake, and in February 2019 his refugee status was cancelled, but he appealed, stalling his deportation, and at the time of the attack, 2.5 years later, the appeal still hadn't been heard. Well, joining me now is the Immigration Minister, Kris Faafoi. Minister, I know this is a complicated case, but one of the principal questions here is this. Given what you knew about this guy, why didn't you declare him a risk to national security and deport him?
Well, we weren't able to. I think it's been made pretty clear that he was still awaiting a hearing with the Immigration Protection Tribunal, and until then we could not do that because he was, as you say, appealing his refugee status and deportation there, and also a claim as a protected person.
Well, then doesn't it go back to your original decision then to cancel his refugee status? If you hadn't done that, there was an option for you to deport him, to declare him a national security risk, sign off on that, you as Minister, refer it to the Governor-General and then report him. So was it a wrong decision made in cancelling his refugee status? There was another option available to you. Why didn't you take that?
Well, he, of course, going back to the original answer, he had his IPT hearing. We didn't think he should have had that refugee status because, as you've said, we found that we believe that he obtained that by fraudulent means. When he was sentenced in early July, a flurry of activity, given the sentence that was handed down, was looked at to make sure that we were taking every opportunity to either detain or deport the terrorist. We got an opinion from the refugee status unit within immigration that they believed that it was highly likely that the IPT would rule that he would be a protected person. Now, on the same day we got that opinion, Crown Law said your ability, therefore, because of the high likelihood of him being a protected person, to detain or arrest him because of his liability for deportation disappeared. So we were waiting for the IPT process to figure out what our options were.
Minister, the detail matters here, and I understand what you've just laid out. And that was the situation after you cancelled his refugee status. But before you made that decision, and you already knew at that point that there were issues around his documentation, he had already been stopped travelling to Syria, and there had been issues with him gaining knives, right? You already knew all of that. But before you cancelled his refugee status, as I understand it, under the Refugee Convention and law, there was a possibility that you could declare him a national security risk. He hadn't made any appeals at that point. There was nothing to appeal. Why didn't you make that decision then?
Well, under I think it's clause 164 of the Immigration Act, there are some means to deport either a protected person or a refugee. He wasn't officially a protected person, so we didn't have that option available to us. And Immigration did look at 1643 of the Immigration Act to see if we could do that too. But again, because of the advice that we were given, we had to wait for that IPT approval to come through.
Why didn't you just put it to the test? Let the court decide.
Well, no, it wasn't the court, it was the Immigration Protection Tribunal. We did get an opinion from the Refugee Status Unit within Immigration about what might happen at that IPT tribunal, which was penciled in for the 13th of September, and again they came back that it was highly likely that he would be a protected person. Now, knowing that fact, we could not have gone to try and deport the terrorist, because we also had an opinion that it was quite highly likely that the IPT would come back and say he was a protected person.
You also had a legal opinion prior to that, which was contrary to the second opinion, and it said that you could detain him pending deportation, right, and apply to the court to continue his detention. So my point about the court is, given you had conflicting legal advice, why didn't you detain him, put the matter before the court, and let the district court judge decide if you had the right to hold him on a warrant pending?
Because we had advice from Crown Law on the 8th of July, as I say, the same day that the Refugee Status Unit gave us the advice that he was likely to be a protected person, that we did no longer have the legal means to detain him for deportation pending the IPT trial. We don't have the ability to detain people who are protected persons only if they are liable for deportation. Therefore, the Crown Law advice that was given to us, that we were unable to do that. We had no legal basis in which to do that anymore.
Okay, so he wasn't a protected person at that point. So this was based on the assumption that he would gain that protection. Can we just look at the documentation in his initial application for refugee status?
Yes.
Immigration turned it down to begin with, said it lacked credibility, and then later it was found that some of the documents were falsified. What can you tell us about which documents and how they were doctored? To what ends?
Yes, so my understanding is that when the police started investigating the terrorist, I think in about mid-2018 they managed to get hold of his laptop and found some documents were potentially doctored. Some of the support for refugee status that he was claiming to have come from his family seemed to be falsified, and some medical documents seemed to be had been tampered with as well. It was on that basis that Immigration New Zealand started the process of cancelling his refugee status, and again, as we know, he appealed that to quite some degree.
Minister, did the documents, the medical documents, were they tampered to overstate his injuries and support this case that he had been tortured and mistreated and kidnapped?
I'm not aware of that detail. All I've been told is that certainly the references from his family to support his refugee status seemed to be fabricated by him, and that there was some medical documentation that seemed to have been tampered by him as well.
So potentially he might not have got protected person's status if his case was actually fraudulent and none of this happened to him, or in the degree that he specified.
Well, my understanding is that if the IPT were to grant him protected person status, it would be on the basis that he were to be subject to torture or cruel treatment in the country of his origin. So that may not have taken into account the means in which he may have got refugee status in the first case.
It goes to the truth of his story, though, doesn't it, Minister?
Yes, it does, but I would also add, as you have pointed out, that Immigration New Zealand, in the first instance of him applying, declined his application. He appealed that, and it was the Immigration Protection Tribunal that actually granted him his refugee status, not Immigration New Zealand.
We're almost out of time, but one of his court conditions was that he have a psych assessment and a rehabilitation assessment. That was ordered on the 6th of July 2021, and he'd been in the community almost 2 months. It wasn't done, so that was a breach of his court-ordered supervision. Why was he not arrested at that point?
I'm not aware of that. That wasn't something that came to my attention in terms of, as Minister of Immigration, that would be...
It's in Immigration's timeline of the events.
Well, and that would have been an issue for police to look at if he didn't meet the conditions of his release.
So you are absolutely certain that you did everything in terms from an immigration point of view to, well, remove this guy from the country?
We did, absolutely. We did. Every possibility was looked at, both Section 163 and 164 that you have spoken about, especially the tempo raised after the 6th of July sentencing for the terrorist, and way back in 2013 or 14, I believe, 2017, I believe, once we started to find out more information about his false claims.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Immigration Minister, Kris Faafoi. It is almost 10 to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki na pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the domestic rugby competitions kick off again, but without the Auckland teams. Actual real-world class is back in from this Thursday for all schools outside of Auckland. You can almost hear the collective parental sigh of relief, but schools are expecting some added anxiety among students who will have to socially distance. And then there's the issue of mask wearing in high schools and colleges. It's not mandatory, but it is recommended. So Checkpoint called a few principals to see how they plan to handle that. Now, 2 of them are eyeing up level 2. The other one, well, she's hunkered down for the long haul in level 4.
My name is Tracy Lador. I'm the principal at Otarahanga College.
How has online schooling been going for you guys?
Mostly okay. I think we broke the back of it last year, so it's business as usual, really. Kids have been quite okay with it, and so have staff.
But are you feeling the joy at the prospect of everyone coming back to the classroom?
Joy and a little bit of apprehension, because there'll be some who will be quite anxious about coming back, especially with masks and things needing to be worn. So there will be a whole range of emotions going tomorrow. Yeah.
So Tracy, how are you going to handle the mask situation? Because it's a recommendation, it's not compulsory. So what's your approach going to be?
So we will be encouraging strongly, but we won't be enforcing. As you know, teenagers are hard to enforce anything on. So masks will be hiding to nothing for my staff, but we will be making sure that we've got them available for staff and for students, including sending some home on the buses so they're available on buses, and just reminding them about their community responsibilities, really.
Do you think it makes any difference to teaching technique generally if half your face is covered up?
Yes, I absolutely do. Teenagers are particularly hard at read. You know, that they struggle to read body language often at the best of times. So if a teacher has half of their face covered, it could be the difference between getting a message right and getting it really, really wrong. So there are concerns around that. If we could have those, full plastic visors, potentially that might be a better option, but that's not available at the moment.
You mentioned anxiety. What do you anticipate some of the, emotions might be with students coming back, having spent quite a lot of time at home and watching this outbreak unfold?
As you can imagine, across the country there is still quite a bit of misinformation about, and so there will be some students who will have heard more of that sort of stuff than actually the real science around coming back. So there will be some of our students who will be quite anxious about being in a classroom, about other students breaching the 2 metre gap, even though the reality is that that's going to be almost impossible to maintain long term. So there will be some kids who will be quite nervous.
So in terms of that 2 metre rule then, are you spacing out desks and things a bit more?
Yes, we are, but the reality is that if that was the case all of the time, we wouldn't get all of our kids in the classroom in the first place. Classrooms aren't designed to have 28 kids and a teacher all spaced out with a 2 metre radius around each desk. You'd only get about maybe a dozen kids in there. So the reality is that as much as we can, we will, but we can't. In all honesty, we can't. And certainly things like corridors, how do we line them up outside in the rain and send them through one at a time? It's not possible to do, really.
Kia ora, Phil Holstein, Principal of Burnside High School and President of the Canterbury West Coast Secondary Principals Association.
Are you pretty excited about having students back?
I think I am. I miss our staff and our students. I've been back since we've moved into level 3, helping supervise a very small number of students whose families are essential workers. So it's good to have our community back with us. I'm looking forward to it on Tuesday.
How are you going to handle the situation with masks?
A lot of questions that come up around mask wearing. My view is very much based around trusting the decision makers first. They have done the research, they've done the evidence, and they're basing it on that, and that there is coming clearly a recommendation that mask wearing indoors, and we will hugely support that, and our senior leadership team will model that in every way we can.
So will your staff wear masks when they're in the classroom?
Again, the word is recommend. We cannot insist or force people. So therefore, again, we model it, but again, individual decisions about how they are proactive in keeping themselves and others safe. But again, I come back to the decision made. It is recommend rather than making it mandatory.
So, Phil, will you be wearing one?
Certainly I will. I think it's my role as a leader to model good practice, and I will certainly be doing that.
And is the school making any provision to, have a supply on hand if students want to wear one but don't have one?
Well, the message going out and in our communications is that, obviously bringing your own is the best in all those situations, because it is their decision. Obviously, we may have a supply, but the clear move is they bring their own. And for health and hygiene practices, that is a better way forward too.
I'm Chris Allen, and I am the principal at Carmel College in Auckland.
Chris, are you looking jealously at the rest of the country?
Yes and no. Yes, and that it's great for the connections that people were able to do and to be back on site. I think no, in that there'll be a lot of apprehension this time with students and teachers coming back, and I think that will be something that will be quite good to sort of see how others cope with that and how they actually allay the fears and maybe learn from their experiences. So that will be something that we will be able to sort of share between ourselves as principals and find out how, what things worked and which things didn't.
Well, Chris, let's look on the bright side then. You can leverage their experience, right?
Exactly, absolutely.
So we know that the government has said masks are not going to be compulsory for colleges and high schools, but they recommend it. So are you making a decision how you're going to handle that? What will you do?
I'm very much for the recommendation. I think that they would be a really good thing for our students and our staff to wear, especially with this Delta virus. I would be highly recommending it, and in one of the places I would be highly recommending it would be definitely on the school buses to and from. We probably have about 80 to 85% of our students come by bus, and they said on this afternoon's update that on school buses they would not be required to wear masks, which I find quite distressing, really. I think that it should be compulsory on the buses because that's where they are jammed in really, really tight, and you can't do the spacings at all.
Kris, hate to put you on the spot, but when do you reckon you'll be back in the classroom?
In level 2. Pessimistically, I would say not the start of the term break. I would say week 1 next term, maybe a few days before the term break. But if we did go back a few days before the term break, I don't think too many people would actually be coming back for those. For what we're doing, so I can't actually see us going back before week 1 of term 4.
Wow, there you go, parents. Sorry about that. We're getting a bit of feedback on the masks in schools as well. This person says school should be providing masks that are uniform and safe, so no competition between kids and no shonky, ineffective masks. And a primary teacher's got in touch to say they're petrified about going back. Yes, we should all be wearing masks. Children are often sent to school sick. 2 weeks of my lockdown meant I was unwell and several COVID tests because I picked up one snuffling, sneezing boy's bugs the day before lockdown. I ought to have sent him home. Parents must keep their sick children at home, but they have to go to work, so we get dumped with buggy kids again and again. Really valid point. Thanks for your feedback. On the hospitality industry, Marie from Dunedin reckons, yeah, she's cool with a surcharge. This was one of the suggestions to help cafes and things get back on their feet at level 2 with reduced numbers inside. She says, cafes having a surcharge, great idea. It is such a joy to be back going for coffees. Yeah, don't skite, Marie. And Sarah says hospitality is doing it tough. However, level 2 areas are able to claim wage subsidies, while part of the country is at level 3 or 4. Let's spare a thought for Auckland businesses, which are not just closed now, but will not have access to this advantage when Auckland moves to level 2 and the wage subsidy disappears. A good point too. And someone else says there's a website called SOS Cafe where you can buy vouchers for your cafes or restaurants of your choice. You don't have to redeem the voucher. It can be straight up support, but you can also choose to redeem them in future when the business is more like a normal cafe. Maybe better than paying a premium or surcharge at the till.
Ahi Marie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says it's poised to seal a deal for enough Pfizer vaccine to meet the surge in demand for it. After a slow start, the COVID vaccination program has ramped up, averaging about 76,000 shots a day over the past week. At that pace, the country would run out of doses before the next major shipments arrive in October. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has today confirmed the government is finalising arrangements with numerous countries to secure additional supplies. She says that will prevent any slowdown. Ms Ardern says that once the ink is dry, she'll share more details about the countries involved and the quantities secured. The government says great efforts were made to provide mental health support to the terrorist in the West Auckland attack, but they were spurned. Questions have been raised about how much support had been offered to the man who carried out Friday's knife attack in a supermarket. Senior Minister Andrew Little has told Parliament authorities did their best to get him help, but to no avail.
Attempts were made to provide him with mental health support while he was in prison, but he refused to engage. He also refused to meet with a corrections psychologist while in prison. With support from the Countering Violent Extremism Forum, corrections engaged with the local Muslim community with the intention of having an imam meet with him regarding his spiritual beliefs. He met with the imam twice, however he did not engage in any meaningful way.
The costs are piling up for Kumeu locals hit by last week's destructive floods in West Auckland. Ruby Lee, who owns Ruby Nails and Beauty, told RNZ she estimates her salon has suffered $20,000 worth of damage. She says she doesn't have insurance.
Which is like, I never thought in New Zealand going to have flooding because I'm come from Vietnam. We have a lot of flood, but in New Zealand, I've been here about 10 years, but I never, see anything like that.
Hundreds of Te Hinga Bethells Beach residents remain cut off because a section of the only road in the area was washed away. The head of Master Builders says builders are facing a perfect storm. Kerry Archer says demand is unprecedented, with builders booked out for 12, 18 or even 24 months ahead. He says that in the last 12 months, the price of steel has increased by probably 50% and the price of timber by 20 to 25%. Mr Archer says there are supply chain problems, a labour shortage and fixed price contracts are harder to get, so escalating costs have to be built into contracts. The co-owner of the cinema group Monterey Cinemas doesn't foresee problems with social distancing at the movies in Level 2. Cinemas outside Auckland are preparing to reopen with 50 people allowed per screening. Mask wearing will be compulsory and many cinemas are putting on more staff to ensure compliance. Kelly Rogers says social distancing is easy in a cinema.
It's actually one of the safest destinations outside the home, where you've got a group of people who sit masked, and that probably sees far less viral transmission than, say, congregating at other social venues where you've got people talking, singing, or even yelling. And just think, we've all missed the smell of fresh popcorn. Isn't that enough to get people back to the cinema in itself?
2 men arrested during an anti-lockdown protest in Auckland have appeared in court today. They were charged under the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act. Jean Bell reports.
Billy Tikahika and Vinnie Eastwood were arrested at a protest outside the TVNZ offices in Auckland last month, just after the region went into Alert Level 4 lockdown. They appeared by video link in separate hearings before Judge Peter Winter in the Auckland District Court. Both were granted access to the internet strictly for preparing their defence legal cases. Mr Tikahika was also permitted to use the internet for delivering religious sermons.
It's 4 minutes past 6. Moving now into sports news. All Blacks fullback Geordie Barrett will learn his fate later tonight in the wake of his controversial red card in last weekend's test against Australia. He's facing a SANZAR Judiciary Committee because his boot hit the face of Wallabies winger Marika Kuriembeti as he leapt to catch a high kick. All Blacks defence coach Scott McLeod feels Barrett has a defence because there were mitigating circumstances. Meanwhile, McLeod says the return of the National Provincial Championship under Alert Level 2 is beneficial for the All Blacks squad. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed the men's and women's NPC, minus the teams in the wider Auckland region, will resume from next Friday, along with the Heartland Championship.
A number of positions that we need players to be playing, so particularly in the lock and the hooking department. So for those players, those fringe players to be playing 100%, they just can't come in cold, so we definitely want that competition up and running.
Team Europe has held off a late American charge to retain golf's Solheim Cup in Ohio. Finland's Matilda Castrin sank a putt on the last hole to edge her singles match against Lizette Salas and take Europe to the winning target of 14 points with 3 matches to spare. Europe have now defended their title for only the second time in history. It's also the second time Europe has won the Cup on US soil, with their previous away win in 2013. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp has a lockdown listen to the latest from Fat Freddy's Drop. We celebrate the joy of a quiet city with sound engineer Andrew Dalziel. He got 30 seconds of near silence on the morning report. We reckon we can go the whole minute. And our mathematician Dylan Mayhew on the use and misuse of statistics during a global pandemic. Have you ever heard of the base rate fallacy? You will if you tune to Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rapa Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel. Showers, heavy and possibly thundery at times. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain at times tonight. First at fine tomorrow, but a few showers from late morning, possibly thundery near the coast. Bay of Plenty, the central high country, also Whanganui to Wellington and Wairarapa. Showers heavy at times with possible thunderstorms in Kapiti, clearing tomorrow evening. Snow above 800 metres for a time tomorrow. Buller and Westland, periods of rain or showers, heavy and possibly thundery at times, clearing Westland for a time tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, showers mainly about the ranges, turning to rain for a time overnight. Mainly fine tomorrow, but showers about Marlborough and North Canterbury until evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers with some heavy hail and snow to 300 metres tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, showers. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rapa Wednesday. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Nā mihi Sarah, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Auckland rugby teams have been benched as domestic and community rugby games are set to resume around the country. The Bunnings NPC, Wharapama Cup and Heartland Championship will kick off again from Friday week, but left on the sidelines are the Auckland, North Harbour and Counties Manukau teams who will have to stay within the COVID border zone. Joining me now is North Harbour men's coach Daniel Halangahu. Daniel, how disappointing is this?
Oh, Lisa, I think it's bittersweet. We're getting rugby back, so for the country, really fortunate that the competition can restart. However, though, it is a tough one to sit back and watch, and those first few weeks will be a difficult watch.
So what discussions have you had or are you having about the possibility that the Auckland teams, could some way move out of Auckland for the competition?
Oh, as you can imagine, we're in behind the scenes. There's a lot of conversations happening. We're working really hard to try and do whatever we can so that we can play rugby, but at the same time, the greater community and the well-being of everyone is more important than rugby. So I can understand the government. It's not a priority for them right now, what happens with North Harbour and our fellow rugby teams. So, some of those conversations are pretty slow, but I can also understand why the government doesn't get to it straight away.
Daniel, who are those conversations happening with?
New Zealand Rugby. They deal directly with the government around trying to get exemptions for us to move out of region. As I said, I think the government's got a process they go through, and I wouldn't be. We're not going to hold our breath on this end.
And would your players be willing to go if they could get an exemption?
I think we would. Yeah. Look, it's as long as it's safe for everyone, as we said, and that'd be the main priority. Player welfare is a number one priority for us. Second to that is, as far as the rugby goes, is actually getting rugby games going again and getting a competition that the community can follow. So
who would pick up the tab for that? If indeed you could make the arrangements and you could move the teams out, who covers the cost of, their accommodation and living away from home for a period of time?
Initial discussions would be that they would fall to New Zealand Rugby. Obviously, the competition is run by them, and so that's been the initial discussions. But look, as I said, we're not overly hopeful that would actually go through, and so I guess for us, fingers crossed that Auckland will move down the level so that we can get back training and eventually play.
What does it mean for your players in the meantime in terms of keeping match fit? Because the other teams are obviously going to start playing, and you guys are stuck at home, aren't they?
Yes, they are. It's a really big contrast in what you can do at home and what you can do as a team. But in saying that, look, we've been really fortunate that we've got a motivated group, and so you can imagine the Zooms we run and the little messages on our message channels through WhatsApp and the like around just firstly the motivation for the boys to get up and get out there, and some of them are hitting the road, some of them are going down the local park, but it's only a substitute for so long. Eventually they need to start hitting bodies and getting ready for real rugby.
So how are the catch-up games potentially going to work then?
Well, there's two options out there at the moment, and I guess, the thing for us is to not get caught up in the detail at the moment. It all changes day to day. We've had 3 different draft schedules being sent through this week, and it does change very often. So, and then we know that it's all kind of come down to if Auckland can move down the level. So, but initially, I think they're looking at there'll be a storm week, as they call it, where we do end up having to play 3 games in a week. That'll probably happen at some stage, but they're also looking at a standalone week somewhere in the middle of the competition where the other teams will get a bye week and we will get to play around. The Auckland teams will get to catch up again there.
Is it fair? You know, I mean, are you on the same? Well, excuse the pun, the same playing field? Because your players are basically benched at the moment. They're relying on their own motivation, and as you say, there's no contact training, right? They've got to do it all on their own. Then you're going to be expected to join these competitions again, where the other teams are match fit and have been playing.
Yeah, look, it's, you know, we're not gonna try and make it something it's not. It clearly isn't an even playing field, and then, you know, that's just something that we're gonna have to deal with, because this is an imperfect world, Lisa, you know, and we're all in this, and we all know that things aren't easy at the moment around the world. There's a lot of disruptions, so. Look, it's a really difficult task to try and get a competition that is entirely fair at the moment. We wouldn't expect anyone to be kept at home longer because we're not able to train. So whilst it isn't quite an exact and even playing field, it's certainly an imperfect world we live in at the moment. And what we can control is, as we spoke about, keeping as fit as we can. So our guys are working their butt off. And then secondly is when we do get that opportunity, is we just go out there and give everything. So, Daniel, they're staying away from the cupcakes and the couch and Netflix? Yeah, well, it's probably a good thing that we're not in level 3 and they can't order Uber Eats or anything else. So hopefully they're cooking nice, healthy food at home. But yeah, it's okay. You know, the effort of the boys so far, and we do some other things. We do a lot of welfare checking, and you know, you can understand this younger generation. It can be a challenge to try and know the best way to connect with them at the moment. So we do that in small groups, and we get our players to lead a lot of that welfare checking, so that, you know, there is genuine conversations going on. But yeah, it was a challenge just to know exactly how to get through to them at the moment, but also keep them motivated for rugby.
All the best, and we really appreciate you joining us this evening. That is the North Harbour men's coach, Daniel Halangahu there. Since saliva testing was rolled out for border workers last month, close to 1,000 people have opted for it instead of having a nasal swab. Now the Ministry of Health has plans to offer saliva testing to essential workers crossing the Auckland boundary. But do we have the capacity to process thousands more tests? Samantha G reports.
It's a slightly more pleasant alternative for those facing regular surveillance testing for COVID-19, but saliva testing has gotten off to a slow start in New Zealand. Asia Pacific Healthcare Group has the contract for saliva testing border workers and says of the 1,300 eligible, just over 1,000 are registered for saliva testing, with around 500 tests being processed each week. Chief Executive Anup Singh says while it has the ability to significantly scale up the number of tests processed, there are some constraints.
Somebody has got to actually collect the sample, register the patient details, and then process the sample, prepare the sample ready to go onto the platforms. That's the bit that is a capacity constraint.
Border workers register for the saliva testing program and receive their results through a phone app or website. Mr Singh says while processing the samples isn't difficult, the logistics are.
There'd be close to 1,000 different employer groups that we need to talk to get the collection process set up so that we can actually collect these samples, register the workers, collect the samples, pick up the samples, bring them into the laboratory, and then deliver the results back.
Dr Ashley Bloomfield says that the Ministry of Health is accelerating the rollout of saliva testing in the hope it can be extended to more people, including the 3,000 essential workers crossing through Auckland's border, healthcare staff and returnees in managed isolation.
We are currently finalising a contract with a further saliva testing provider and expect that this will be soon an option for workers who might need weekly testing because they are travelling across the Auckland boundary.
Dr Bloomfield says a contract for saliva testing was being finalised with another provider, along with how those tests will be made available to people. But Road Transport Forum Chief Executive Nick Leggett says testing could be both a logistical and stressful nightmare for truck drivers. He questions if facilities have the capacity for saliva testing and says offering tests in the workplace would be more appropriate.
So if truck drivers' whole day is taken up on the road delivering freight, actually getting them to deviate and go to a testing station somewhere and stopping their truck and getting out and then going and queuing and getting tested, that actually adds time to their legal working hours and could compromise the delivery of that freight.
Top epidemiologist and Yale researcher Dr. Anne Wiley is frustrated there have been months-long delays in using saliva testing to get on top of the current outbreak. Dr. Wiley and a team of researchers developed the Saliva Direct test, and she says there needs to be more labs in New Zealand processing saliva samples.
That actually the more labs that you can have helping the different supply chains, what if one lab goes down, having another lab that can take that on. And in the end, it doesn't have to be saliva versus swab. You can still be doing both, but if you have expanded capacity, you can test more people, you can get results back faster.
Dr. Wiley says the rest of the world had shown New Zealand it could not rely on a small number of laboratories if it wanted to avoid issues in the supply chain.
It is almost 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A record spend over the next 3 years will see improvements to public transport, road safety and a raft of upgrades to local and national roads. $24.3 billion will be dished out via Waka Kotahi's National Land Transport Program. But as always, there just never seems to be enough cash. Emma Hatton reports.
The amount is a 44% increase on the funding available during the 2018 to 2021 period and comes from central and local governments, a loan and the National Land Transport Fund. Relying on petrol tax and road user charges, the fund itself ran into revenue difficulties, with all but $1 billion left for new projects after being pre-allocated to ones already on the go. The Transport Minister, Michael Wood, says this funding round was particularly difficult for Waka Kotahi.
The bulk of forecast revenue was already committed to continue the record program begun over the last 3 years. COVID has also had significant impacts on the NLTF, and local government bids for funding far exceeded the amount of money that was available.
The chair of the agency, Sir Brian Roach, says the shortfall in the Land Transport Fund was why the government has come to the aid with a $2 billion loan.
We approached the government over recent months to indicate the nature of the challenges we were facing, and it was from our approach that this financing became available.
Waka Kotahi will have 10 years to pay it back. And while the agency's chief executive, Nicole Rosie, says the spend amount is a record, there were no new shiny projects in today's announcement.
Around 90% were already committed projects. So there are projects that were already underway and we're already committed. So we're just continuing to fund those through this NLTP. There is some roading improvements, some additional roading improvements, Mount Messenger and things like that, but it's not significant.
$6 billion will go on public transport, walking and cycling, with the Green Party saying it's not enough and National saying it's too much. National's transport spokesperson David Bennett says more investment was needed in building new roads.
What we're seeing is a focus on maintenance and public transport and walking and cycling to the expense of projects that actually enhance our economic potential and deliver the productivity that we need for New Zealanders going forward to repay the debt that we've undertaken in the last few years.
$1.3 billion would go toward implementing the New Zealand Rail Plan, $30 million would go on coastal shipping, $2.9 billion would go toward the Transport Agency's Road Safety Plan, Road to Zero, almost $7 billion will be invested in local road and state highway maintenance, and $3.9 billion will go on so-called resilience funding, for instance, the completion of the Waikato Expressway. In Wellington and Auckland, a bulk of the regional sums fed into the respective Let's Get Wellington Moving and Auckland Transport Alignment projects. And Michael Wood says while this program is now full to the brim, there's every likelihood more government money will be needed to pump into transport projects in the near future.
An independent reviewer says Invercargill residents should feel confident that their local council can do its job after a tumultuous 12 months that included potential government intervention. Late last year, his report found major issues stemming from a leadership void, with Mayor Sir Tim Shadbolt struggling to do his job. Invercargill City Councillors received a 6-month progress report for the first time publicly during an emergency meeting this afternoon. Tess Brunton has more.
Overall, the Invercargill City Council's report card paints a much more positive picture than last year. better staff and councillor morale, positive progress on key issues and councillors working better together. Southland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Cherie Carey is pleased to see some positive progress.
It's a huge relief to see this amount of progress being made, and I guess in that short space of time. Richard's report does also mention that there's a wee ways to go. Obviously, there's still the leadership void with Sir Tim Shadbolt, but they seem to be dealing with that in their own way and put in, I guess, processes in place to be able to work around the issues that they're having in that space, but still being able to get on with the job.
But the report doesn't shy away from continued concerns about Mayor Sir Tim Shadbolt, who is viewed as not just unable to fully do his job, but actively continuing to stoke discontent. Ms Carey says the ongoing leadership issues are a distraction.
Because we work closely with the council, we're aware of all the good things that are being done there, and so it is frustrating to pick up the paper or read online every day that it's just this petty crap that's, being tossed about around personal issues with regards to the mayor and his deputy or bullying or whatever the allegations of the day are. But we're resigned to the fact now we have to work around that. It's going to come down to an election next year.
The report's author, Richard Thompson, says it's a different council than the one he first reviewed.
The council is a work in progress, but I would sincerely wish that the people of Invercargill recognise the very real progress made, and my view that the whole of council, as it's currently operating, is meeting the fundamental requirements that its ratepayers should expect of it.
He says Invercargill is about far more than just the mayor, and that shouldn't overshadow what the council has and can achieve.
At the end of the day, the mayor's just one part of a council team. Important, yes, but one vote amongst 13. And if the focus were to remain on him at the expense of the very real improvement, then it will ignore, I think, what this council has shown it can achieve.
Sir Tim says he believes the report contains allegations that are presented as fact.
The report makes no mention of my latest report or anything the council has specifically done to address this issue. The report touches lightly on the serious allegations of bullying and downplays the serious issue of email interception.
Councillor Leslie Soper says the council has made huge strides forward.
It has given us the basis to say that we have reached a point where we can honestly say to our community, this council has got to the point where you can have full confidence that we will go on to be a good council.
Councillor Lindsay Abbott wants the council to stay the course and make more progress.
Let's continue on. Let's be a formative council. Let's work for the electorate and let the people decide the mandate 13 months from now.
All councillors, apart from Sir Tim, voted to support the staff recommendations, including looking to phase out external appointees. With warnings, ICU units in New South Wales could be overwhelmed with COVID cases within a month. Nurses are bracing for an onslaught. The situation in Victoria is not as dire, but health staff are also worried about what is to come. For a second day in a row, the state has recorded 246 new cases following a spike yesterday. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
Whether it's in Sydney or the regions, New South Wales nurses are facing some of their toughest days.
So I think it's fair to say that everyone's a bit stressed.
Ran Butcher is an intensive care nurse and CEO of the Australian College of Critical Care Nurses.
Even those people that have no COVID are probably worried about how they're going to deal with it, and they're probably waiting to see how it will impact on them.
In the Sydney hotspots at the epicentre of the outbreak, modelling released by the government is forecasting up to 2,000 infections a day until the middle of this month. And by the end of October, up to 3,900 people will need to be in hospital, with up to 560 COVID patients in ICU. Including non-COVID patients, ICU demand is expected to peak at 947. The government says it has a surge capacity of 1,550 beds. Intensive care nurse Rand Butcher is worried the quality of care will slip.
We've done our best to plan for a surge, and so they trained extra staff, they bought extra equipment, but you can't tell how people are going to react. I think if the system gets under strain and we struggle, that's when the overseas experience indicates that the outcomes are worse. It's not just numbers of people, it's the quality of those staff as well.
The modelling warns that demand is set to have an overwhelming impact on the operations of ICUs, and limited resources might need to be prioritised for those most likely to survive. Rand Butcher insists his colleagues deal with these ethical issues every day.
Resources are always tight and you're always rationalising resources for those that will get good outcomes. So people should be reassured that this is part of normal intensive care, but no doubt it's going to take a toll, and it's not just a hard couple of weeks, it's a hard couple of months.
It's not only health workers in New South Wales who are stressed and fatigued. Victoria is recording its highest case numbers in more than a year. And Danny Hill from the state's ambulance union warns paramedics are struggling to cope with the workload.
Oh, we're certainly right in the middle of that sort of pressure as well. We've had situations where some hospitals, quite large hospitals, particularly in Melbourne's western suburbs, have been unable to take most patients unless they're incredibly urgent, and that's because there's been an exposure in a particular hospital. They've had to furlough a large amount of staff, sometimes hundreds of staff. Ambulance crews have to go further to another available hospital, which then becomes overloaded. So we've had crews ramped for their full shift. We see those patients staying in the corridor with the ambulance crew. The ambulance crew can't leave to attend to other patients if they're needed in the community. But look, unfortunately, that's the reality of the system.
And let's get to some of your feedback here. A lot of you getting in touch about, the issues around COVID. This person says it's disappointing that freight industry seems to want to complain about testing. They are one of the biggest risks, as Victoria and Queensland have found. On the issue of roading, one listener says it's totally criminal putting more money into roads. We need electric public transportation with rapid rail and buses. Ireland has stopped all new roading projects. Their heads are not in the sand over the climate. And on hospitality, this one, extra payment for businesses from customers to help through COVID should be in the form of a tip so that they don't get taxed on it. That would rile me, that person says. And someone else says people need to be really cautious and realistic. Look at what is happening in New South Wales and the rest of the world where Delta is spreading exponentially. We realise that businesses are hurting, but they will hurt far more if Delta gets into the community. Now, this next one is an absolute doozy. So I need to try and keep it together while I read it. Takes me back to school days. This person has said last lockdown there were people making clear face shields from OHTs. Remember the old overhead transparencies that you used to write on with the old Sharpie and project onto the screen? Hopefully some schools will still have the once ubiquitous OHTs tucked away in a stationery cupboard and they can make some clear shields out of them. I would love you guys to have a crack at that. Send us a picture if you manage to make a face shield out of that or anything else useful. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. First up tomorrow, they speak to an Auckland councillor who reckons footpaths and car parks should be used for outdoor dining during lockdowns.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News headlines at 6:30, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The Justice Minister, Kris Faafoi, says Crown Law had been advised it was not legal to detain the man who carried out the West Auckland terror attack ahead of his immigration appeal. The government is confident its efforts to secure additional doses